right. So, looks like we are live, just testing things out. It's about 5 minutes before we get started. So just hang tight. We'll be there in 5. It's about 5 minutes before we get started.
Hey there.
Hi, Jacqueline. Welcome.
Thanks. I'm great. How come I can't see myself? Let's see here. Got it. There I am.
Ho ho, there you are. Hooray. How are you
Hi.
doing? How's farm life?
Oh, it's so nice. I'm like, ugh, I couldn't be happier to be where I'm at.
Oh my God, you are in the right time for it as well, I feel like.
Oh, yeah. It was the universe giving me a gift there. Like, get out of the city while you can.
Oh my God, 100%. Um, how's the new book been? I've been seeing all the launch events and all of that stuff. Super exciting.
It's a lot of work. It's good though. It's just like, oh my God, the internet situation is, I'm like, owie. It's
Have you
like,
been finding, I've definitely been finding that it feels like it's more work to do events online in a weird way. Like you don't have to travel, but
it's just so different, like a totally different kind of work.
mm,
Like requires so much more, such a different kind of energy, It's like there's no actual person there to like feed back into your loop. So it's really weird,
shouting
very
into the
strange.
darkness.
Yeah.
Oh man. Oh yay, we've got some people in the waiting room. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. As you know, this is the sort of second time we're doing this, and
Yeah,
I
this is so cool. I'm really glad you're doing it. I'm like super proud of you for making it happen because it's a lot of work to wrangle all these folks and figure out who they are and where they are and like
thank you. I mean, yeah, doing my best, and I mean, it's been cool to see people, even from the first one, kind of connecting on social media or in other places, and hopefully, part of this will be just everyone across the country sort of knowing each other and being able to support what each other are doing.
mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, it's like a little dream come true. I always thought that would be a cool thing to do, and I was like, it probably won't be me who does that though. I'm like,
no,
glad you're doing that because probably won't be me who's gonna do it.
it's
Like,
been, and people have been lovely too. Like, there's been a number, Jeremy and a few other people have been really great about sharing it, and people who are more connected and plugged in and have typed with more people than I have are like, okay, I'll share it to my, the folks who I know.
cool. Yeah,
Okay.
get myself situated here. Like, look
Yeah.
cute. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Any, you look great. Any
Thanks.
questions before we sort of let people in and get the show on the road?
No, we're all gonna be on here together though, right? Like I'll be able to see everyone, and people will be able to talk. Like I'll be able to hear everyone.
Hmm.
Should I mute myself and unmute myself?
Yeah, so generally if you're not talking, you can mute yourself, and then when you're ready, you unmute. The usual. Cool. Let's start letting people in, and I'll play a little silly music, and we'll get the show on the road. Thanks for coming in early and for doing this. I'm super excited to have you here and get to share space. All right, here we go.
Hey,
Hi, Joseph.
hello.
Welcome. Good to see you. Hi, Chris.
Hey, hey.
Bobby.
Oop, I'm multitasking.
Bobby, where are you at? Oh, no, that's just your place. Is that bookshelf? The bookshelf is new, right?
Beautiful. There.
Chris. Welcome. Oh, and Abby's here. Awesome. I'm gonna go ahead and throw in the chat. There's a little doc that we started the last time. Yeah, shout out Boston Typewriter Orchestra. That's what we're listening to. Hi, really good to see you. Hi, Abby. Little doc that we started last time. If you haven't already put your information in there and want to be able to get in touch with people or share resources or any of that kind of stuff, we're going to have your so it's 11 o'clock right now. Oh, and people are still coming in. Once the orchestra plays out, we'll kind of get this show on the road. I'd love to start things off by just asking folks to go around. We did a version of this last time, but we'll have new people here and new things. If we just want to go around really quickly and let us know, hi cat. Ooh, that's not that. Let us know a little bit, who you are, where you're zooming in from. Kevin, that is Kevin. Good bathroom, sir. Who you are, where you're zooming in from, and anything that we should know about your, about your practice, about your deal, what you're up to in quarantine, what you're up to these days. If you are, thinking about or working on any projects, and in particular book projects and publishing projects, we're super blessed today to be able to have Jacqueline Suskin with us, who's one of the OG typewriter poets of this generation, and also has been doing really interesting things both with hosting artist residencies and also with traditional publishing. So that's sort of the lens or the direction that I've been thinking about for today, because I know it's something that a lot of folks have expressed is interest in, sort of our intersections as these like weirdo outliers with the traditional literary establishment. So that's what I'm thinking about for what we're talking about more broadly today, but like talk about whatever you want to talk about, So I'll start things off. I'm Brian. He or they pronouns. I am here in Los Angeles, and yeah, I do typewriter poetry as rent poet. Have a book called The Poetry of Strangers that came out in June, and am working right now. I just got named Poet Laureate of West Hollywood, so I'm thinking about taking this practice. Thank you, and working with a city in quarantine to, try to get everybody poetry and work on that. And I've discovered on Zoom the most effective thing is popcorning, which is like the sort of like third grade mechanism. So I'm going to go ahead and popcorn to Shane and just go ahead and popcorn it around. I'll keep a list in the chat of who's gone.
Hey there. So I'm Shane Canody. He, him. I live up in Seattle, Washington. And I've been doing street typewriter poetry since 2015. And doing hip hop and working as an MC since I was 17. Did the slam poetry circuit some, and am working on publishing now. That's the next wily step. And I will popcorn over to Abby.
Hi, I'm Abby. I'm in Denver, Colorado right now. I've been typing since 2011. This year in quarantine, I was doing some live streaming. Now I'm working on a poetry collection. For work, I was doing a lot of political, like phone banking and organizing earlier in the year. Yeah, that's where I'm at right now. Kevin.
Oh, hey, everybody. I'm Kevin Devaney. I've been writing poetry for like 22 years now. Cheers. I came up through kind of slam and spoken word, went through the academic side of things, did the MFA thing, was always really interested in different ways that poetry and performance could meet, which is one of the things I love about typewriter poetry. What I'm working on right now is I've been doing the typewriter poet thing for about 5 years as my full-time thing. And right now I'm going through the massive list of book projects that I've always wanted to put together because I love book binding as well. I am literally at this moment working on what's probably like the most complex book I've ever put together. So these are like my first hardcover, self-bound, hand-stitched, whatnot. So I will have, I'll be over here going all out while we do this. And that's me. And I want to popcorn it over to Sabine.
Hi, everybody. So nice to meet you. I'm in Munich, Germany, and thanks again for turning the time, because last time I fell asleep because it was in the middle of the night and I couldn't attend. So thanks very much. I've been doing the typewriter poetry since 2017, I think. Yes, 2017. And I've been incorporating it in also in art projects that I do mostly with a female collective. And yeah, and during quarantine, so at first I was a bit, do you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, okay, sorry. At first I was a bit in a shock and I didn't do very much. And then I slowly started doing live stream for kids. And then I went on to do 2 book projects I have, which are coming out tomorrow and next Monday. So yeah, there's been a lot of work, but so that's what I do. Thanks.
Go ahead and pass it on, Sabine. Who do you want to hear from?
Sorry, I was not the popcorning. Yes. How about Joseph?
Hi, everybody. My name's Joseph. I do poetry as the Walking Wall poet in Winchester, Virginia. I've been doing it for the past year and a half. Most recently, I've been getting more into the wedding side of doing wedding poetry. I did 2 weddings and then the governor changed requirements. So my 3rd wedding got canceled. But it got to a good start and I was able to kind of put together a good template for that. I've also been doing poetry on Twitch, typewriter poetry on Twitch, which is a streaming service. And it has been a lot of fun. Kind of took a 7 a.m. morning words, self-commitment type of thing. And it's gotten a little bigger into celebrating other street poets and other poets in general. That's been a lot of fun. And and then also when it comes on the poetry side, I've been procrastinating on what I've been calling my COVID collection, which has basically been any of the poets that relate to COVID-19 that I've been writing. So, and that's what I've been working on. And thank you again, Brian, for setting this up. Thank you everybody for being here. And I'm going to popcorn over to Marshall.
Hey everyone, I'm Marshall. Usually based in Philadelphia and right now based in Taos, New Mexico. Been like typing since I guess like 2011. And yeah, recently I've been working with Poets for Peace, which is a project of poets from around the country, you know, doing social justice based poetry, but also just kind of uplifting spirits. So it's been a fun project. We put out 2 different zines and we have some performances coming up. No dates yet, but just like, yeah, I don't know, just like doing collective stuff over Zoom and creating good vibes across the internet. I guess popcorn over to Luke. I want to hear about Story Wagon.
Hey, yo, everyone. So nice to see everybody, and thanks for changing the time because, yeah, I'm in Scotland. I've been doing typewriters on the street since about 2013, 2014. Mostly in London and moving around Europe. And pronouns he, him. Just going to read through the list, Brian. I make typewriter ribbons which have multiple colors, which you can see on rainbowtypewriter.com. My Instagram handle is normally @pettyprance, the verb prance. And I'm just setting up right now. I've moved through kind of like, I got sick of being the thing and being the artist. So making a platform in which other people can join in with what I do. And in Scotland, it rains a lot. So creating a cozy space that can go into the streets and provide an alternative to consumerism on high streets. So I'm currently running a crowdfunder for that, which has reached its target super quickly. And you can check that out at storywagon.co.uk. Thanks, everyone. It's so lovely to see so many people here. I'll popcorn to Chris.
Hey, wow. I want to get involved in like every project that everybody's mentioned. That's exciting. I'm taking notes like a good kid. I'm Chris Vitiello. I do typewriter poetry as the Poetry Fox, and often am dressed up as a giant fox when I do it. I don't do poetry as much on the street as I do at like getting booked for events. But of course, this year have had to change that as much as I can. Although we're under some weird restrictions here in North Carolina where I am. I've been doing markets lately since holiday market things are sort of picking up. Those have been hit or miss. Be interested to hear from other people what kind of success they've had. It's a weird space. But other than that, working on a book manuscript. I have a publisher we're working through winnowing something down. It's too long and gets dull. So we're working that down. Prose poems, and then have been working with I also write art criticism, and have been working with a few other critics in my area around Durham, North Carolina, and we're close to starting a zine that's just sort of like short criticisms that can come out like once a week, something kind of fast, almost like an art newspaper that will be highly local but exciting project. So. Thanks all. I'm gonna popcorn to Kat down there, Cat in the Hat.
I swear the hardest part is unmuting yourself. I'm always like, where is it? Where is it? Hi, I'm Kat. I co-own the Zelda Fitzgeralds with my sister, who's the real poet in the family, Kelly Grace Thomas. I produce events all over the country. And we got together and started doing the Zelda Fitzgeralds, which is typewriting poetry on demand, wedding, corporate events in Las Vegas, primarily all over the country. One of my claim to fame is that we've done 23 gigs and we've given 29 paychecks to artists. Because I love paying people to do the jobs. In quarantine, I have gotten into producing murder mysteries online for restaurants that are looking to expedite their takeout. And then in terms of writing, both my sister and I are doing NaNoWriMo this month, if anybody else is doing that, which is a fun experience. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. We did a gig in Las Vegas last week for an event production company we're now working with, which was really fun because it was socially distanced, and it was interesting to see all the ways that you can throw a party during quarantine. But yeah, that's pretty much what we're all about.
Thank you, Kat. Do you want to?
Yeah, popcorn. Vivian.
Okay. Hi guys. My name is Vivian. I use she, her pronouns. I am not a poet, but all through middle school and high school, I was pretty busy doing like typewriter restorations. I had like a website. It's called typewriters101.com. Since I started college, I've been a little less involved just because it was hard to bring everything to the dorms. But I'm moving into my own apartment next semester. So my friends have been really like excited about it, and they are kind of urging me to start again. So like fingers crossed, that's something I pick up again. As far as writing, this is kind of a new thing, but I just added professional writing as an additional major. So still not poetry, but I like language. It's something I'm really interested in. Is there anything else I'm supposed to say? I don't think so.
You're great. I'll just add really quickly and embarrass you. I met Vivian at a bat mitzvah that I did, and her mom was like, "My daughter is in high school and restores and sells typewriters. You have to meet her." And then we've been friends since then. So you're wonderful. I'm so happy you're here.
I'm so happy to be here. And then I will popcorn to, I think Melody earlier. I don't really know where she went, but yeah.
I'm still here. Hello. I'm Melody. I am coming to you from the parking lot of Rudy's in Austin, Texas, which is unceded Comanche shared hunting territory. Which, yes, it means I'm an Indian, and I'm old enough to say I'm an Indian because we've been decolonizing the word Indian. Oops. I have, in the late 90s, I was very active in Austin's poetry scene, nurturing slam poets, Austin International Poetry Festival, poetry in the schools, and poetry on the streets for kids that had dropped out of high school, but still had a lot of talent and were real worthwhile poets. I went to graduate school, which was a big strain, and it kind of separated me from the poetry community here, except that many of my friends got chronologically advanced as poets. And I've been doing my 222 this month. That's 2 of my friends have died, and 2 of my friends are in intensive care, and 2 of my in 2 weeks. Two of my latest weeks. And so I've been doing eulogies. I've been doing personal poetry and some grief work. And my friend said, oh, you need to get back to doing the things that feed you. So that's what I'm doing, is coming back to the community that I know is here, really curious to see who's here, what they're doing, and how can I get into it? I'll mix it up with you.
So great to have you and your energy, Melody. It's great to meet you.
Well, thank you. Let me look on here. Let me look on the participants. Okay, how about Kathy? I invite Kathy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Thorne, she, her, coming to you from Toronto, Canada, where it's snowing today. And okay, what else am I supposed to say? So I'm fairly new to typewriter poetry, and so having come to it March of 2019, so very new to it. Prior to that, though, I have 2 decades of writing cartoons, which in retrospect are actually very poetic. So I feel like I've been doing this a while. What else? Mostly weddings and events. I tried my hand at kind of pseudo street poetry, where I was kind of in a area in front of a friend's store, so I wasn't like on the street, and that was interesting. I think I may be more of an indoor poet. What else can I tell you about me? That's it. I'm so excited to be here. It's just amazing to me that I get to kind of hang out with people who do this, which I guess I'm still in the honeymoon phase, so I'm very, very in love with it. And okay, so I'm going to pass it on to Bobby Gordon.
Thanks, Kathy. Nice to meet many of you. Nice to see many of you again. My name is Bobby Gordon. I use he, him, his pronouns. I grew up in the Youth Speaks slam poetry scene in the Bay Area, and then came down to LA for school, thinking I would stay 4 years and then get the hell out of town. And now it's 14 years later, and here I am in LA, as happens to many of us. I'm one of the co-founders of a group called the Melrose Poetry Bureau with Brian and our colleague Nayeli. We do a lot of street poetry, event poetry. The part that's been most interesting and exciting for me personally has been cabaret, using improvised typewriter poetry as part of a cabaret experience, an interactive theater experience with the audience. Currently, I've been doing a lot of photography and a lot of filmmaking. I'm really interested in this moment at the intersection of sexual health and racial justice. And as a person with hella intersectional privilege, race, gender, all of it, I'm really curious how to leverage that and be a part of movements to use our art as something pushing for liberation. I notice on our chat, I can't help but notice we're a very light-skinned group. I don't want to assume people's racial identities, but typewriter poets tend to be a very white group. And so I'm curious how we can leverage our privilege and our hipsterness to push back against those systems that make this easier for us as white folks to be artists. Yeah, so I'm interested in that kind of work, and that takes the form of everything from photography to, I've done some eulogy poems during COVID, to activist adult film to get out the vote. So a number of different things. And I will popcorn to Dominique.
Are you with us, Dominique? We'll come back to you. They may be out of the room at the moment. Let's
Sure. Amy.
Hi. Took me a while to get in, so I apologize. I was popping around and it's distracting at all. Hopefully you didn't notice me at all. So I missed the beginning of what we're doing, but I'm kind of picking up on, we're just talking about our typewriter poetry briefly and what we've been doing.
Yeah, just a quick introduction where you are and sort of how you come to be here.
Okay, perfect. I am outside Detroit, Michigan. I'm in Ypsilanti. And I came, I found an old typewriter, and I always thought that when I had tried on manuals in the past, I guess they must have had stronger fingers back then. Well, it turned out I just never tried on one that was functioning well, So when I found this one, I just fell in love with it. And in my little town, I have a little group with a patio happy hour in our little town is a big deal. So I just started bringing it with me all the time to happy hour on the patio just to play with it. And for something to do, I started typing poems about people. So I exhausted all my friends, and it'd be the waitresses and people walking by. And then one of the shop owners asked me if I would do an event that they were having at their shop. Would you do this for people? And so it just kind of took off from there. I think it combines for me my love of the typewriters, writing, social work, because mine are really, I really enjoy the personal part. I have about an 82% cry ratio on people when they get the poems, and that's like a yes for me. And my improv background, I really, really love the having to do it on the spot. The trouble I'm in, and where I'm like, I don't know what to do with mine, is I like the longer, more meaningful ones. It means something to me to do them. But commissions don't work for me because I'll spend 5 weeks trying to do something that I wanted to do in 15 minutes, So that's a challenge for me. And I'm curious if anybody else has that. So, okay, thanks. It's wonderful to see all these real typewriter poets.
Yay, thank you, Amy. And we still need to hear from, I'm just putting the final, I think it looks like 5 people in the chat who we haven't heard from yet. Emily, maybe do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Emily. My pronouns are she, her. I'm coming to you from Brooklyn, and I've probably been typewriter poeting for a year or two, and I do it mostly at music festivals. I'm also a performance artist and an installation artist and do other theatery things there. So yeah, that's me. I'll popcorn to who's next? Lila.
Hello there. So I'm Lila. I don't care about the pronouns because whatever. I can't really decide which one I fit in. So like, yeah. I'm in Hungary still. It's bloody cold in here. But I've been doing stuff lately, like open mics. I've been invited to a few of them. I'm also kind of more of an indoor poet. I had no idea actually that this could be done like out in the street and as a gig kind of thing. But yeah, I've been doing open mics a lot lately, mostly with people in the Bronx because those were the ones that liked my stuff the most. And also I've been, well, I'm just coming down from the sort of activist phase of things because I was really trying to persuade people to give Joe Jorgensen a chance, which didn't really work that well because it got to like 1.2% or something. So like, yeah, but that was a thing. So I'm trying to transition from that into I don't know what yet. I've been doing a lot of anti-lockdown prose poetry, memoir kind of things. Yeah, that's about it. Still looking for a way to get the hell out of here. So yeah, if any one of you wants to like get me out of Europe, that would be neat. If you have the means, of course. And will popcorn to Jonathan.
Hi, my name is Jonathan, he, him. I'm a high school English teacher in Dallas, Oregon, which is about an hour south of Portland. I teach at a small high school, about 60 kids. I write on a typewriter every day. I don't think I've taken it outside yet, but I've taken it to many classrooms and other people's houses. And I'm all about helping people tell their stories and finding stories and sharing stories. I write a little bit of everything, so I'm all about getting the right stories to spread around. So, and let's see, is it Tashin?
I think Tashan just jumped out, so we'll see if they come back into the room. But I think that is everybody who is here. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you all so much for calling yourselves into the space and introducing yourselves. I know some of us have met before, but it's great to hear the update from those who have met and to get to meet new folks from all over the world. Super excited, and I'm happy. I'm happy for those who are in Europe that we were able to move the time up a little bit to make it so it's not the middle of the night for you.
Well, I mean, that could have been a bit easier, I guess. I mean, well, I could make it, but like, I'm used to doing this at like 4 a.m. or something.
For sure. Super excited to have our keynote today from one of the first typewriter poets who I met, who was working here in LA, and now is on to other really exciting ventures at, is it Forklift Farm, Jacqueline? How do you say the name of the farm?
Folk Life.
Folk Life. Forklift, Folk Life. But
that's okay. We have a lot of Fork Life jokes actually, so it's perfect.
Jacqueline's been doing typewriter poetry for many years, and I remember meeting at a coffee shop in, I think it was Silver Lake or maybe Echo Park, and talking, and I was just starting out and really interested in sort of the performative potential. And I remember Jacqueline telling me what I really want to do is I really want to like have books and write books. That's where I want to go with this. And it's been really incredible over the last 5 years to see her make that happen. And she's now the author of 7 books. The most recent is Every Day is a Poem. Hope in the Dark Season also just came out, as well as her Edge of the Continent trilogy. And so she's just got this incredible array of experience as a typewriter poet, as a speaker, as a curator of artists in residence, and as an author working with various different presses. So really excited to get to pass things over to Jacqueline now to share a little bit of her wisdom with us. She's going to speak for, as long as she wants. And then we'll have an opportunity to ask some questions, do a little bit of a Q&A. Maybe she'll give us a writing prompt. And then after that, we'll have a little more space for dialogue, and I'll open some breakout rooms if we want to do more small group stuff. So that's sort of the course of today. Will be wrapped up within 2 hours at the most, because I think any longer than that on Zoom is murder. And I super appreciate all of you making the time and spending your Sunday with each other and in this community. So without further ado, Jacqueline, thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I remember meeting with Brian and having this great feeling that someone who was picking up the reins of typewriter poetry actually respected me enough to come to me and ask questions. And that was one of the first times that anyone had done that. And then people did that afterwards, which is just nice to like see the lineage of it progress. So that was part of why I wanted to do this, was just to, I know some of you, so it's just neat to see people adding on to this and watching it expand. I started doing that in 2009. It was my only job for 11 years. This is the first year that I haven't done like public performance, really. I did one maybe. I don't really do events anymore. I've kind of phased myself out of being a typewriter poet, except for the fact that I still get a lot of orders through my website, which I enjoy. I can crank out some commissioned poems like that. So I'm like, that's for me, that's like really great. I can be in my sweatpants, no one can see me. I can like have my whole like desk set up. It's so nice. I definitely feel like I exhausted myself in the public performance realm because I worked so hard. I mean, I was living in Los Angeles, and some of you also live in Los Angeles, so you know that it's very expensive to live there. And I just worked all the time, and I was so into it. All like the whole trajectory of my career, I was just like obsessed with my job, and I would do it whenever I could. And then all of a sudden, I was just like, I think I'm done. And I had 1 year of maybe kind of vacillating, and then I was like, I'm done. I did it. That project is sort of over for me in a way. It doesn't mean that I won't write poems or that Poem Store doesn't still exist. I really care about that craft, and I see how helpful it is for people. So to me, the like service part of it is something that I continue to show up for. But I have a degree in poetry. So I started off, I mean, I've always written poems. Even when I was a little kid, I was writing weird cryptic verses in all of my journals and everything. It's just always been my way of kind of communicating with the cosmos, or letting something communicate through me. And so I went to school, got a degree in poetry, but then I traveled around because I didn't feel like taking the traditional academic course, which clearly none of us are on that exact track. And that usually looks like you get a degree and then you get a PhD and then you teach. And, you know, there's like this very kind of boxed in idea of what it is to be an academic poet accepted by the institution. And I wasn't interested in that. I felt like I needed to live more, to have more things to write about. And on those travels, I met Zachary Houston in Oakland, and my friends were just like, oh, you should meet our friend Zach. He's a poet. And I was a poet. So they were like, let's put these poets together. And Zach just kind of casually was like, oh, I do this thing, you know, this is how I make my living. I write poems on the street. Would you want to do that with me? And I had just purchased a typewriter in Los Angeles like 2 days before at the Rose Bowl for some reason. As a traveler, that was a very odd thing to purchase. It's huge. You have to lug this thing around. Like, I don't know why I thought to buy that, but I was like, yes, I just bought this typewriter. I will join you. And when I showed up, he told me it was at a street fair in Oakland. And he was like, you know, I ask people to do this with me all the time, just kind of as a joke, because most people don't want to type publicly in the street. It's immensely challenging. It requires like a strange combination of performance and artistry, as poetry tends to be a very like hermit-based practice. You know, most poets go unseen, and not a lot of poets are performative. So this like weird combination, and I showed up with my typewriter and we sat back to back in the street. And after I typed my first poem, the first person I wrote for was weeping, and Zach was just like, "You're way better at this than me. Don't ever do this in my town." I was like, okay. So I made a pact with him that I would, and I, because of that interaction, have always been immensely territorial about typewriter poetry. And I'm sure some of you have heard me talk about that over the past. Is, you know, I'm like, don't come on my turf. This is my special little niche job that is, you know, and now look at how many of us there are. So maybe I could just like relax a little bit. And at this point, I have relaxed into allowing the many typewriter poets to expand across the country. And I feel much less protective. But I think at first I was just so mesmerized that it could even, I didn't even understand that it could be my job for like far into a year after that. And I moved up to Humboldt County in Arcata, California, which is where I live now, which is Wiat territory. And I have been typing poems at the Arcata Farmers Market, and I typed there for years. And suddenly I was like, I think I should be doing this for more people. Like, this is so impactful. I have had so many amazing, deep, like healing interactions with people. And I just suddenly was like, I think I need to move to LA. I have a bunch of friends there. There's so many people there. I could expand my reach in a place like that. And in that same year that I started typing poems in 2009 is the same year that I got my first publishing deal. And that came from being at an event in Portland, Oregon, where I connected with a publisher and I was typing next to them, and my friends had told me they would be there. And I made a mock-up of my first book and I just gave it to them. And you know, after a weekend of connecting, we were friends already. So they were like on the spot. They literally looked at it and were like, we'll definitely publish this. And that's how I got my first publishing deal. And I will say that every single publishing deal that I have gotten, all 7 of my books have been published by actual publishers. None of them are self-published. Those have all come from personal connection. Like this new book, this book, Every Day is a Poem, which is like my biggest book and put out by the biggest publisher that I've worked with, Sounds True. I have an agent for this book, but that agent came from a really, really close friend of mine. That connection is personal. Like, I'm not submitting things through like weird avenues where no one's ever heard of me. All of my publications come from like someone who I'm really close with, who I've either connected with through Poem Store or who has just been my friend for many, many, many years. So I like to like start off a publishing conversation with this truth that like none of this comes from this weird like academic, like I submitted my book to 15 different publishers. It's more like, who do you know? Who are you connected with already? Who's interested in your work already? Especially as people who are in the street, you've met so many people doing what you do. One of those glorious people will be like, oh yeah, I know someone who works at this little publishing company and they'd be interested in creating a book for you. I can guarantee it. That's just like the way it goes. So that's kind of my biggest takeaway from all of it is, you know, it is really astounding that I have 7 books published. I'm amazed by that, but also like I'm amazed that those opportunities came from like genuine friendships or just connections with people who really already believed in my work because they have access to it. And that's, I think, the unique thing about being a typewriter poet is that so many people have access to you, which is totally different than being a writer or an artist who's like locked away and like in private, is that you're in public, like people get to connect with you all the time. So I could kind of like, if there were more time, I would tell each one of those stories because they're all, for each book, each story is really good, and it kind of like pays tribute to like what that means to have these connections and to be this person who can kind of sit in the chair of a serious poet and be channeling, you know, the words of the world, but at the same time be like, I'm connecting with this real human being, and I'm going to maintain that connection. And how many connections can I maintain, and how many times do I have to say, I cannot maintain any more connections? I'm really tired. I have a lot of people on my plate because of, you know, over a decade of typing like over 40,000 poems for people. So I'm like a little bit I'm like, okay, I'm glad I have an agent now. Maybe I can like not do it that way anymore. And that will be interesting. That will be like a whole other chapter, because this new book definitely is like an avenue into this other world of, you know, this is a huge publisher and they're like cradling me through it. And I've had a team working with me and like PR and all this different stuff that I'd never experienced before. And so when I think about talking about publishing and kind of giving some guidance, it's like one thing builds on the next and builds on the next and builds on the next. And it was like over a decade of patience that I worked with these things. Like, and some parts of it happened miraculously very quickly, and then a lot of other parts of it were super slow. Like even working on this book, I worked on this book for over 2 years, but I wrote it in like 2 weeks. And then I was like, you know, editing it and like designing it and then planning all the marketing and doing all this stuff that my like weirdo witchy poet brain was like, I don't want to do any of this stuff. Like, I can't believe I have to self-promote during the midst of a fucking pandemic. This feels insane. But I can say all of this to you, and I say this to anybody, but I believe in it. So even though I'm being asked to like discuss it again and again during this crazy time on our planet, I'm also like, well, I actually really believe in this as like a healing tool and a method for people to like be in touch with what they actually think and believe. And if they're going to be engaged, and they're going to be engaged in social justice, and they're going to be engaged in their community, they better know what they think about things. They better be able to like connect to their voice. And so for me, all of my work kind of stems back to this sense of you're in service. You're like showing up to the public, you're showing up to people. And that I think is one of the most special things that we do, and it's worth being dedicated to. So another part of like how to balance these things, I was like, what are the most important things I can talk about with publishing? And the other part is that I make sure I give myself time away from all of it. Like I give myself a retreat every single year, at least once, to be away from everyone and everything. And that's different than quarantine and isolation, because I don't use the internet. I'm not like engaged. This is, you know, I'm still engaged even though I'm alone in my room. There's all of you. But I have these times in my life where I set aside for like process and practice of bookmaking and focus that I don't allow people to access me. And I make sure that I give enough time for that, because in my writing practice, that's what it looks like for me to be able to create all of these books they're different than typewriter poems. They're not spontaneous. They might come from a spontaneous thought, but I edit them and I work with an editor and I work really, really hard on them. So it's just a different mindset. You know, I'm not putting myself in public the entire time I'm working on these books. I think there are ways to balance these types of work, and I've done that over the years, but I also think like setting time aside for being like, okay, and now I'm going to work on my book, which is a different mindset. It's a different energy. So that's been really important to me for each one of these books, is like, okay, I'm going to, even just like a few weeks of just being like, this is the thing I will focus on. I'm going to turn off my poem store thing on my website. I'm not going to let people access me that way. And I'm going to focus on publishing this book. So I was like, what could I talk about from this new book that would actually be appropriate for this group? Because I mean, I don't need to talk about like finding awe or how to make meaning out of things with you guys, because you definitely know how to do that. And you probably know how to do this, but this section felt like the most particularly different than what happens when you're writing spontaneously, which is the section on sharing your work, which is publishing perhaps, or whatever, however you want to share your work. I give all these different examples of, you know, it could be really simple. You don't have to publish your work to share it. But there's a whole part about writing practice and editing, and like thinking about editing seems like kind of the antithesis of typewriter poetry. So I thought it would be fun to talk about a little bit for just like the the balance of, yeah, I can write 40,000 poems over the years that are totally off the cuff, but I also have this like refined craft of editing my work and working with an editor. So I'll just read a little bit of this and then we can move into some specific questions if you have any for me. In order to share more effectively, it's important to learn how to edit and adjust our writing. When we write, we're trying to discuss existence through our own exceptional eyes, and it's hard to find a balance between the preciousness of the personal and the crafting of clarity for our readers. After I write a first draft, I start the editing process by finding the places in the poem where I'm telling the reader something without including an image or a sensorial addition that enhances what I'm trying to relay. So like a lot of times when you're in the street writing a poem, you're not necessarily like taking all the time to go back to be like, oh, this part I'm telling them something, I'm not showing them something. I mean, show don't tell is a really old adage, but I think that it can get lost really easily when you're doing poems on the spot. How can I add a bit of definition to something mysterious? How can I include my reader in a very metaphysical opinion? This is where the technique show don't tell comes into practice. Instead of telling the reader what a bird singing on my windowsill looks like, I try to explain its song and feather coloration with metaphor. I try to avoid cliches by connecting the bird to something unexpected. And then I give these little examples of like how I might write a poem that's just like, why just tell this? The wonder of this day is the dove in the morning. The sun rises and it flies with white wings. It is beautiful and small, moving higher as I start another day. When you could show us this. The wonder of this day is the fringed white wing of the dove as it flies east toward the rising sun. First light caught in its laced flight, a lady's glove taken by wind. Its coo, a delicate voice that reminds me I am indeed beginning again. So it's fun to kind of like see these little shifts. Neither of those are that great of a poem, but it gives a good like example of what the concept is. Can you see the difference? If you're writing about your daughter's first visit to the ocean, show us the expression on her face, compare it to something personal, something that someone else can relate to, something unlike any other thing, because your daughter's face is unlike any other thing on earth. This is the delicate work of word choice, and it's a huge part of the craft of poetry that takes a lot of practice. Choosing the right word isn't something that necessarily comes naturally. It's an exercise that may get easier over time, and it's connected to a writer's confidence in voice as it is to the ability to see beyond their own lens. And then I'll just end with this. If I'm trying to invite anyone and everyone into my work, that doesn't mean I use simplified language. Instead, I have to build a language that is both uncommon and understandable. So I think all this stuff is kind of important when you're thinking about publishing. It might seem really like simple and base level, but I also think that it's maybe something we forget about because of all of our practice on the street. And if you're gonna bring your work to a publisher, which by the way, it does work to submit your work. I'm saying like none of my publications have come from that, but other people do. And I'm actually, thinking about moving forward. I see the next step in my career as a poet being more along the lines of being held in the institution, because now I've done all this work, and now I think if I apply for grants or if I apply for prizes, like I'll actually have a much better chance at winning because I have over a decade of stuff to show for it. So that'll be interesting. Like now I'm saying all this, but maybe in 10 more years I'll be like, yeah, well, I just like won a bunch of prizes and got noticed by the institution in this different way. And I'm kind of interested in that. I don't necessarily know if it'll work that way, but I'm open to it now. Whereas before I just didn't even really care about it or think about it. But I think now, because I've put in all this practice and all this time and I've seen all these different things come out of it, I feel inclined and I actually feel comfortable with being like, okay, well, I'm down for the institution to support me now. That'd be nice. And I didn't really care about it before, which is interesting. It's not like I was like, oh, they don't notice me. Why don't they notice me? I was like, I don't care. I'm on the street. I don't need to be noticed. I don't need to be held by them. But now, after all this time of being in this process, I'm like, it's just cool to watch us all shift. Like at some point, all of our trajectories as typewriter poets in the street will shift. Like maybe, we'll be doing the same thing for over a decade, and then suddenly you're doing something different. Like now I don't live in the city anymore. I moved back to Humboldt. I live on a farm. I, host retreats here, and I'm still writing poems for people. I'm still sending out, spontaneous poems in the mail, and I'm still doing projects that kind of resemble maybe certain ties to Poem Store. But I can see the process and the progress, which, as like showing up today to talk to you all about it, I was excited to just say that, like, that there's like a lot of progress, and it does shift and change and grow, and it kind of like snowballs on itself, like I never thought I would write poems in the street for my job for over a decade. That is insane. But I also never thought I would write a book like this about poetry and have it published by a big publisher. It's not something that was on my radar. So it's less of like a plan than it is necessarily like whatever your specific thing is you're doing with your project as a typewriter poet will like build on itself for forever. I mean, it will just keep going, I think, if you keep giving it energy. So yeah, okay, that's a good enough ramble, I think. Maybe my exercise is just kind of like taking a poem that you have been working on and applying that like imagery lens to it and trying to like beef it up in the places where you're like, oh, this is kind of a common emotion, or this is a very universal theme that I'm tapping into. How can I make it weirder? How could I make it a little more like unique to my strange brain? And a lot of times what I do to do that is I will literally just close my eyes, and the first thing I see, I'll make a practice of attaching that to whatever the thing is I'm writing about. And it ends up being some weird combination. And that's interesting. Like, you want to like connect some universal cliche theme that you're working on with something that's like super wonky and bizarre from your brain, because then that's interesting. So that's like my little takeaway practice that you can try to apply if you want to. Let's see if anyone wants to, does anyone want to ask me anything?
Yay, thank you, Jacqueline. Yeah, we'll open up the Q&A section now. Feel free to unmute and just ask questions directly. If you want to ask questions in the chat as well, feel free to do that, and we can read them out, and I'll be monitoring that. I'm curious, Jacqueline, in this, I love the growth and snowballing and all of that, and I'll get things rolling. How do you decide what to say yes to? I love that idea, and I feel like so much of your practice is this say yes. And then I'm really interested as you become more selective, as you grow, how do you decide that?
Yeah, it's a really important part of how being a performer is sustainable, is learning really when to say no. Because I said yes to everything at first in LA, and then I was like, oh, what am I doing? I'm just doing all this crazy stuff all the time, driving all around this massive city. I'm exhausted. So for me, I was like, okay, am I being paid well enough? Do I care about this project? Like, one thing that was pretty fantastic during my entire 11 years of Poem Store is that I never once had to compromise what I do. I never once was asked to change what I do. I never once was asked to be like compartmentalized into some weird thing where I was doing something specifically for a brand that I didn't believe in, or like changing the way that I write, or, any of it. Like, they just wanted me to do what I do. And so if there ever was a question, like for a job that maybe borderline gonna like push me in that direction of not being true to what I already do as a artist, I just would be like, I don't want to do that, and I wouldn't do it. So that's part of it, is learning how to say no. And then also I really like had to deeply learn how to not be friends with every person who I wrote poems for. In fact, like at a point I wrote huge in my journal, do not befriend anyone that you meet at work. Because it was insane. It was like I was just, what am I going to do? Tend to all those people in the moment, and then later also as they're not my friends, and that was hard to do. That was hard for me. It took a long time for me to learn that. And then there's also like the idea of charity work, which I think is an important thing to think about. Like, you can really only do like a certain amount of charity work. So I would let myself balance those things out, where I was like, okay, I have this feeling about this, I have enough time and space to give this for free or for a super discounted rate or something. But being careful not to do that all the time. And then mostly just saying yes to things that actually felt like they would sustain like bigger connections. So, I mean, that's like, you can call that on your own and figure out whether or not you think that working this event that might be a little less enjoyable is also like really going to probably connect you to some people that you want to know for future projects or support or something like that.
Thank
Okay,
you.
is anyone, who else wants to ask me something? Yeah, Luke.
Hey, Jacqueline. I wanted to ask you, thank you so much for your talk, and it's so nice to hear you talk and to connect with something that's not a still image. I wanted to ask you about your practice in terms of being outdoor in public versus using the internet as kind of like a public outdoor. Like your dancing channel brings me so much joy, and just that work between the public through Instagram and the public through the street. How does that interface work for you?
That's a great question. The internet is not my favorite place. It's weird. I think some people might be like, oh, you look like you're doing a really great job on the internet. Like, wow, you must love to be on the internet. And I'm like, wow, I really fucking hate to be on the internet. It is like killing me. But I have a lot of boundaries around that. So I have set up a lot of things for that to be a healthy space, because unfortunately, I am not allowed to be a writer who lives on a mountain away from everyone, sending my work in on, horseback to be published and read by many, and then going on a book tour once a year or something, like some old idea that I had of what it would be like to be a poet in the world. No, I actually have to show up to the internet, because somehow, very organically, by the way, I did not seek out Instagram as my thing. It just, I don't know how that happened. That's an LA thing, I guess. I don't know. That just like, again, snowballed to that on its own accord. I didn't like put a lot of effort into that, but I saw it as, oh, here's an opportunity. And now I see it as like, oh, that's actually like, you're demanded. You have to do that if you want to like have a published book by a large publisher. They expect you to use that outlet as another form of PR, as another form of communication with your community. But it is completely different than showing up at an event. And I used to just be like, oh my gosh, I miss being in person with people, because it's a totally different kind of exchange. And Brian and I were talking about that before we started today. But I also am just like, I was tired from doing events. So for a little while, the internet was like a saving grace for me, like when I first moved up here this year. But then COVID happened, and I was like, oh no, I thought it was just going to be this thing I could tap into and enjoy like very briefly in this weird way. But like, I remember in April was National Poetry Month, and I was like on fire. I was like typing poems, doing all these live poems. I was just going every week, and I was really like, people were ordering tons of poems. And by the end of that month, I was like, fuck the internet. I was like, this is awful. Like, I cannot be asked to do something like this. And so I stopped. I was like, I'm not going to do that. That doesn't work for me. So it is a balance. And then the dancing is just fun. So I do that whenever I feel like it. But I think that the use of the internet is actually a requirement, which is a bummer, but it's real. I hope that answered your question.
Kathy and Kevin, we both have questions in the chat if you want to unmute and ask.
Yeah, whichever one of you.
Okay, go ahead, Kathy. You do it. You got international privilege here. Go on.
Thank you very much. Okay, so you were talking about not accepting to go to an event which you felt went against your beliefs, or at least that's what I heard. And I was wondering if you've ever experienced someone asking you to write a poem about something that you were just fundamentally against. I live in such fear that someone's going to come up to me and ask that I write a poem about just something political, or something that I deeply, deeply am against. or racist, like straight out racist, you know, write me a
Mhm.
poem about how why people are better than all the other people, or have
Well,
that happened and what did you do?
that's not happened. I've had this question come up in different ways of like, have you ever had someone ask for a poem that felt inappropriate, or have you ever like had someone not like a poem, or you know, had an interaction that was difficult in that way? And the answer is no, I haven't. And part of that is that I think that people who are interested in getting a poem are not interested in that type of exchange. It doesn't mean that they don't have those values or beliefs, but when they come to the table and they're looking for a poem, they're usually like leaning into grief, or they're leaning into celebration, or they're leaning into this other part of themselves. It doesn't mean that I know that they're this great, like flawless person. That's not what I'm saying. But I haven't had that interaction because I think even just the invitation of coming to get a poem evokes something a little bit different from the customer. So I don't really have that concern. And also, I'm a pretty radical political person, so I'm happy to like welcome someone's weird political idea and then craft that into a poem. But that's just me. So there I think there's two realms. There's like the political and like having to write Trump poems as like a joke, or like people kind of like, but really what they're doing is like showing this like vulnerability of like either they're scared, they're angry, they don't understand, or something. So I can lean into that. And I did at one point. I was like, I'm done. I won't ever write that person's name or anything. So it wasn't really like that. But then there's this other side that's like the hypersexualized stuff, which can be like really intense, but I can handle that too, because I'm like, again, that's like people being weird and vulnerable and trying to push their limits, but they're probably actually just curious and want to like hold some kind of conversation for something that is really taboo or that they don't talk about with their friends or whatever. So I think it just, I heard you say that you haven't been doing it for that long, so I'm just like, you will hear everything. Like you can just like expect that you will hear everything.
Well, I had this one experience where these two couples came up, and the men were a little bit like it leaned towards them being homophobic, and I'm like, what am I going to do with this? So I mean, I wrote a poem, you know, insinuating that they might be gay, and I thought, well, you brought it up, like, so but I mean, that was okay. I handled it the best way I could, but yeah, so now I'm well, it'll come and I'll handle it however I do.
Yeah, I think that's what I was just gonna say. I was like, well, it seems like you already know what to do. Like that's like the truth is that somebody can bring you something and you can kind of see it. That's your job, is to like see through the like weird, like, you know, the thing that people present isn't necessarily the thing that they're actually even asking about. And I think like the better you get at typing poems spontaneously, the better you get at like having that lens removed and you can kind of see what's really going on there. And then that's the thing that you pay tribute to or talk about in your poem. Okay. Kevin, you want to go?
Yeah, I just in all this talk about like moving into this publishing world and like operating in this different kind of space, it's very different from street poetry. I wonder if there is any kind of internal struggle for you around who has access to what work. One of the things that I love the most about street poetry is that you can take this art form that has this reputation of being very ivory tower, you know, not like music where everybody knows their favorite musician, people freeze up when you ask them their favorite poet. So I love that this work has taken this art form and made it something you walk past on your way to CVS, you know, not something that you like go into the poetry section of the bookstore because you consider yourself someone who reads poetry. So I wonder if as you've made this transition, if that's been at the forefront of your mind or how you manage that paradox or if there's a strain there. on who has access to the work, and just how to balance the ability of the art form from being accessible to everybody to being, you know, what can the impact of a less accessible art form be?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think if someone were to ask me what is like the thesis of why you are a poet, and I would use, if they said choose one word, I would say accessibility. That's like been my driving force my entire career as a poet. And so when I made this book, I was like, this is just the next step in accessibility. I mean, this is, to me, this book is not for people who want to be us. That is not who it's for. It could be, you could all get a lot out of it, I'm sure, because you love poetry. So you'd be able to like look at a book like this and find things that you thought were interesting or things that you relate to, and it would be fun practice. But for somebody who, as you said, isn't connected to the ivory tower of it, who isn't connected to any of that, this book is to show them that they also have a poet living inside of them. Their brain is like totally capable of being in awe and noticing details, and like even just having the mindset of a poet, not necessarily writing anything down. Like I think like all of my intention behind creating books is to create things that are accessible. And you know, I do think that the next book that I write will be less accessible. And I think that I've done enough work around the accessibility of poetry that I can lend myself a moment of creating something a little bit weirder that maybe not everyone will be drawn to, but that will be for my own creative process. But even in that, I will hold accessibility on the highest shelf, because to me, that's like the thing I care about the most. So I don't feel like I'm straying from it by not being in the street. I feel like I'm just finding, how can I bring accessibility into, like, this book is published by Sounds True. They publish like healing books, like the Dalai Lama, and like, you know, like they're like a wellness healing world. And I'm just like, cool, let's bring poetry to those people. Like they love it. Like that's great. That's really interesting to me. That's like yet another door to open. And like, I think I'm just kind of curious about, as people who are dedicated to making poetry accessible, how many doors are we willing to open, and what does that look like? You know, I never thought it would look like me sitting on the street. I also never thought it would look like me being a self-help author. So, you know, it's like just kind of transforms and keeps going. And I think that is the same spirit as like, you know, let's see how many people we can get poetry, you know, we can get to open up to poetry and like to remember that it exists. That, I don't know if that gives a good answer, but felt like it.
It's very interesting and probably generated more questions in my brain than we have time for me to ask. But I love your work. I'm just glad to get to hear what you have to say about all of this.
Thanks
for coming in.
Yeah. All right. I don't know, how is the time situation here, Brian? Like, what's the?
I know we got 2 more questions in the chat, which I think are great questions, and would love to make time for them. And then I'll go ahead and open up breakout rooms, Zoom right now. It's great. You can go into breakout rooms as you like. So I've named them with themes. If you want other themes, let me know. Or if go in at random, that's fine. And we'll have some time for a smaller group conversation. But I know Amy and Shane had both had really interesting bubbles in the chat.
Yeah. Either of you, can you just say the question to me? Because I'm like a little old lady trying to read that.
Sure. Mine's shorter, so I'll barge forward, Shane.
Barge in.
and I feel like this, I've never asked this because I feel like it's probably like, oh my gosh, she asked that horrible question. But I'm curious, since I came about this on my own, as far as pricing. Like, is there any kind of standard that I just don't know about that you all kind of do? Or is everybody figuring out on their own? But other than donation only, I'm just wondering how people come up with monetizing it. And if that answer is as individual and frustrating for everyone as it is for me, you don't have to answer. I just want to make sure there's something that I don't know.
Okay, well, I'm gonna say two things. I'll say one is that I figured all this shit out on my own. There wasn't a little typewriter pool for me to lean into. So I'm just gonna say I figured all of that out by myself. I had no one to talk to.
Point
and Zach was of no help at that point because he didn't do events and stuff. So he didn't have any kind of like framework really then. But then I would also like to say that I think that consistently changes. And so that it's better for someone who's still doing that work right now to answer that question other than me, because my lens on it is, you know, I haven't done an event. I've done an event for someone who I worked for many, many times. So they have like a set special rate. It's different. But like, what is the event pricing world like? How does it feel for you guys to help each other figure that out? Because that would have been really cool if I had someone to ask those questions to. Brian, maybe you want to say something about it.
Sure, and I'd be interested for Kat to lean in too. I mean, there's two separate models, right? Like when I started off with it. My sign said, "Pay me what you think it's worth," and then I talked to someone who like does taxes for a living, and they're like, "You should put a recommended donation." And so then I did, and then I made the recommended donation. I was like, oh, you can just tell people because people don't know. But that's on the street. Are you thinking more for street side poetry or for events, Amy?
For me, it's just literally I'm interested in the conversation. I've done all of it. So I have the most fun when it's for free, because as soon as there's money, I feel pressure. But also once I started getting, doing events and being requested, I've done it by the hour. At events where it's free for the guests. That's really fun because then at least it's not, they're not paying. And I've tried different dollar amounts at different events and like holiday fairs and things like that. And I still don't feel comfortable putting any money to it. And I don't want to do it any on demand for free for sure. I enjoy being in public and doing it on my own, but so I don't have a good answer at all. So that's basically where I'm coming from. There's no direct question. It's just I'm really uncomfortable with the topic for me, and wondered how other people.
Totally. No, and I'm super grateful that you brought it up. Oh, go for it, Kat. Yeah, Kat does all the events.
I'd love to jump in because, like, I have to. The best way that I look at events is it's what you're getting out of it, which means there are, with the stuff that the Zeldas has done, we've done stuff for free where you do it for brand recognition, where it's like you're going to be at this event. And a lot of times those are the really cool events I find are the ones that they don't have as much money because whatever reason. But like I've done a lot of events for free where I'm like, I want to be at Art Basel to say that I've been at Art Basel. So I'm going to talk my way in and then I can say it, I can drop it. When I hire people at $100 an hour for 3 hours without a typewriter and $150 with a typewriter. That gives you the incentive to get a typewriter so I don't have to deal with the hassle of it, but also it incentivizes you to like really start to look at it as a business too. That being said, a lot of corporate events, like any tips that are bestowed, I always tell my clients, like, take them. I don't care. I don't want an argument about it. I just want you to take the tips. So a lot of times, like my clients, my poets that I've hired have made as little as $100 and as much as $400. Like, we did a gig this summer and the client tipped them $250 on top of 3 hours of work. Always, this is one of the things that I find is very frustrating with hiring poets is that they're so excited that they're getting paid for their work that they will keep doing it after you tell them like for events, we book in 3 hours, right? And I always tell them, okay, you get to 2 hours and 45 minutes. You tell the people you have like one more poem to go and that's it. And then like, I'll come back. And especially if we have a big gig and there's a bunch of poets and there'll be a poet who's been writing for another half hour because they feel like they have to do it. And I was like, you don't understand that the only way this works is if I dictate a time frame so that I can go to my person who's in charge and be like, listen, if you want it longer, you have to pay for these people because their time is worth money. It's
so hard to look in someone's face that's been hovering around your table and waiting and waiting and waiting and saying, oh, time's up.
The worst is when no one holds space for you to end your shit and like you're like, this is your job, event planner, get these fucking people out of here. I'm dying. Like, don't make me tell them no. I can't. That was terrible. I fully like totally feel you on
It's
that.
and it's a fine line, you know. I always like encourage. I always say it takes about a drink and a half for people to realize they want a poem, which is why most of the time we get extended, which is great for my poets because they don't get paid for the first hour. You know, get paid to sit around for the first hour, but then they get the extra bump, you know, for the fourth hour that they have to work. And you know, it's all contingent on margins. I like to make a 30 to 40% profit margin just because of taxes and stuff like that. So if I'm getting a gig where they're paying me a lot more, I'm going to extend those percentages onto the people I'm hiring too. Does that make sense?
Love that.
Yeah, I mean, helpful just to know how people are doing it. Thank you.
And also, like, if you're doing it at a coffee shop, you can do trade. You can say, hey, this is worth $150 in credit, you know, because they'll give you free lattes the rest of the week because they'll be like, oh, you know, she comes in on Tuesdays and she writes poetry. I did the cannabis cups, and that one we did for a trade. And I had a sign that said, tip me in cash or drugs. And I usually made twice the amount on drugs than I did on cash. But it was great because like we ended up doing a gig where we wrote for Caviar Gold because of it. Because they met us there and they gave us a bunch of drugs and we wrote some poems and they like did a social media blast with it. And it was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for that, Kat. And I'll say that a bunch of people have left their rates in the comments, and I'm excited for that. And I just added another room to our breakout rooms called the Money Room. So if you want to talk about that.
The Money Room. Yeah. Okay. Well, that was fun. I was like, love that. I'm like that. I ended working events doing 3 hours for $1,000, and well, you better believe I never went over that. I was like, bye, I don't want to sit here anymore. And I don't care if I sat here for an hour not doing anything. Well, that's great, you could pay me anyway. But okay, does anyone have anything else they want to ask me before I have to go to the community center and sand? That's what I'm doing today.
I know Shane had a great question about lineage, and then Sabine, I see your hand as well. So Sabine, do you want to start us off, and then Shane, do you want to close us out with the lineage question?
Oh, all right.
So, hi. So it's about the writing and editing process of poems. So I was wondering when you are ready to let or to have somebody else read your poems, and who would read the poems? Like, how long does it take you to actually show somebody? And then who would that person be, and what do you do with it? And like, at what point would you bring in an editor to start working with them? And do you have a private editor, or do you always like a private person you know who is skillful, or do you always work with the editors of the respective publishing houses? That would be interesting.
I have an editor that I've worked with since college, so he knows like the whole arc of my career and all of my reasons for writing, and we're really good friends. So that is like, honestly, having a good editor is such a crucial part of being a good writer, in my opinion. If you look throughout history, pretty much every single person who you're like, wow, their writing's incredible, I love them, they had a special editor that they worked with. You know, and I think that it's not maybe as hard to find that person as you might think. It's usually someone who's close to you, like a colleague or just a pal who knows you and knows what you want to get across, but they also like know about poetry. Like my editor, I went to school, we were in the poetry program together. He has, you know, a master's in poetry and translation. He's somebody who knows the craft really well. So I feel confident sharing my work with him on this personal level, that he understands me and he understands what I'm going for. And he understands the craft of poetry and like can tell me if the poem has weak spots or whatever. So he's been my editor for every book that I've written. And I think the other part of the question is like knowing when to show him. That's kind of different for every poem, because sometimes I'll work on a poem for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, months before I ever show it to him. And sometimes I'll just send him a batch of poems that are all ready to go. But usually it's pretty project based for me. Like I'm working on this specific book. I have him like lined up and ready. He knows that I'm going to send him like a batch of 10 poems to edit. I also pay him. That's a really important thing. Pay your friends. I think that practice has been crucial for all of my work. So yeah, finding somebody who you trust, whose opinions you trust, who you know. And if you don't do that, if you don't have someone editing your work, I'm like, oh, you gotta have someone look at your work. It's really important. I like hardly ever hear anybody who's like a well-established writer who doesn't have a great editor or a great connection with an editor. So okay, I'm really excited about this weird mycelium mushroom lineage question, whatever that is. I saw the beginning of it. I'm like, what's that? Tell me, Shane, what is that?
I'm sort of in love with the origins of this whole manifestation with poetry and the typewriter and the public commons. And a lot of branches end up leading back through Zach. And I think that you're one of the early poets, right? I think Sylvie's up there too in California. And then when you go past Zach, the trail goes cold for a little while, and there's like little blips and moments of percolations in different places and in different media. I think there's a French film where there's a street typewriter poet. I can't imagine like during the Beat generation that people weren't dragging typewriters to streets and parks. Especially Haight-Ashbury and Golden Gate and all of that. And so I just wonder if you have, what your perspective is on that, what history you've sort of collected and gleaned and I don't know, I just think it's very rich.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I was always interested before in something like this that Brian has done, which is like collected all of you to kind of see like what does it look like, all of us in one little chat room together, or in my mind before we would have been in person. But just to hear those stories and like pay homage to the starting places of things and see the lineage of it, it's really interesting. You know, like I was actually thinking about this earlier in the conversation before you asked the question, because I was thinking about Amy. Like, where did you hear of typewriter poetry? Like, where did you get the idea? Was it naturally like occurring in your mind just to try to do that? Because for some people, that's what it is. They didn't see someone somewhere. It is like a collective conscious thing. They're like, oh, I'm a writer. I'll bring my poetry to the streets, because I think people have been doing that for way before the Beats. I mean, like, you know, the prophets of the streets of the old world were rattling off their poetry. That's what they were doing, you know? So I do think it's this really old lineage that kind of took these manifestations. And then like, Zach is kind of like this weird starting place for this other iteration of it, which, by the way, I'm still super close with him and we talk all the time. And, you know, he doesn't really do that anymore at all. But it's funny to kind of think like, oh, you either saw someone doing it, heard of someone doing it, or you randomly thought to do it. Amy, did you randomly think to do it?
Yeah, I got an old manual typewriter that I fell in love with and needed something and carried it with me, and it was like, what can I do? So I started typing poems for people around me.
Yeah, you didn't even like see anybody do it.
Yeah, no, I didn't know anybody else did it until that. Yeah, so no, I thought I invented it. So
yeah, well, a lot of people think that, and I think that's fascinating, because I'll be like, I've been doing this for a long time. That's why when Brian came to me to be like, how do you feel? Like, what's the deal? I was like, thank God someone's actually like asking my opinion about this thing that's been my only job for a really long time. But now we're like at a different phase in it, where I do think it's like spreading even faster and faster. And I just gave up on the lineage almost, you know, like at first I kind of thought maybe we would all stay connected, but because of the internet, that it's just like spread in this way that's really interesting. I think it's that kind of leans back towards the idea of accessibility, and like not only are you making poetry accessible, but now it's accessible for anyone to write poetry. And sometimes that's terrifying for me because I'm like, wow, you're out there in the street writing really crappy poems for everyone. You're giving us a bad name. Like, you know, but that's what am I going to do about it? I can't stop that. Like, I can have my own feelings about it, but I can also just kind of celebrate the fact that whatever it is, it's like this organic, natural way of kind of presenting the craft to the world. And I think that's inspiring no matter what. Like even if the poetry is not that great, I'm still kind of like interested in the fact that there's something like innately human about this desire to express and this in this realm away from, it's not the internet, you know, like I didn't take a picture of one of my poems for probably like 6 years. And then I didn't have a phone. And then I finally had a phone and I was like, oh, I guess I should take and then I would only take pictures of the ones that I really liked because Lord knows I don't want a picture of every dog poem I had to write. But and by the way, eventually I said no more dog poems. So if you feel like you don't want to write poems about people's pets, you should just say no thank you. Because that was so annoying to me. But yeah, I think that lineage is something that I've thought about a lot. And I definitely, it's so cool to feel like you're part of this really old practice. And I think that about poetry in general. Like, you know, this is an old way of expressing whatever the world is trying to express. And then just making yourself accessible on the street while doing it is just another gift of that practice. So that was a long-winded answer to that. But I was pumped.
Hello? Hello?
Hey, Tashawn, we hear you.
Can you hear me?
We got you.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome. I know you missed the introductions. I know you're in New York City, right?
Yes,
What's your
I'm in New York City, and I'm a visual artist. I'm not a I guess it's a typewriter poet. Is that what it's called? What you guys are called?
Why not?
Sure.
What do you got? A typewriter poet?
It's
can you say the? But
it's kind of a made-up term. People call themselves street poets or typewriter poets or poet for hire on demand. There's as many words as you want for it.
Oh, but I never knew it was like, I've seen poets on the street, like typing and like the train stations and in different places. But you know, I just feel like it's just another form, it's just another medium. And it's another medium. And I mean, the way we can connect, you typewrite, you poets, and me as a visual art, you know, we're all poets in some way, shape or form, right? And you guys just, you know, I feel like you paint pictures also, but you're just using a typewriter to paint those words, right?
There's totally like, I think, a visual aspect to it.
Right.
How did you find the event, Tashawn?
And I saw like an event, like I saw like the event on a event website for poetry. And I've always been interested in poetry. I love poems. And I thought it would be something interesting to attend, which is why I, you know, signed up for it.
Okay.
So my question for Jacqueline is, where do you draw your inspirations from? I don't know if you said that earlier in your, you know, or if I missed it, but like when you're creating your poems, like when the person, does a person just like, you just listen to a little bit of a story, or like, how do you like, can you just like briefly, just as quickly as you can, like just tell me like the process?
Yeah.
Like, and like, I know it's not the same each and every time, but I mean, is there like a certain like routine or like a mental, that's just one of, I have a lot of questions, but I'll just ask you that one. Is there like a format that you may, or like you go through, like a mental ritual, or I don't know, like, you know what I mean? I'm just curious to know, like, what is your process as far as y- um, creating a piece or a work for one of your prospective clients or whatever, you
Yeah,
know?
I usually ask them to tell me a subject, and I'll tell them, just tell me something that you've been thinking a lot about lately. Like, what's been on your mind? What have you been feeling? Is there something you want to call into your life? That's like my little guide that I say. But usually people have a subject ready, so I don't need to say anything. I sometimes say that if people are stuck and they don't know what to ask for. And then whatever happens in my weirdo brain is very unknown to me. I've been asked to describe that moment many, many times throughout the last decade of my life. And I don't know, I kind of consider it a trance. I go into some weird trance. I don't know what I've written until I read the poem aloud to the person. And so the inspiration just comes from, I guess, being there in the moment and allowing myself to slip into that place in public, which, by the way, I've looked back on that and thought how weirdly dangerous that is. And can't believe that I did that for so long as like an unaccompanied person at a farmer's market, and just like, hi, I'm just going into a trance every 5 minutes out here in public, no big deal. But that is what it's like. And so, yeah, the inspiration comes from whatever that person is offering with their subject matter, but also like whatever they're offering with their eyes and whatever they're offering with their spirit, or whatever's happening with them emotionally. As an empathic person, I can tap into that. And there's like a certain psychic quality to that. And maybe not all of us feel connected to that idea, but over the years, I would just let people call me whatever they wanted to. They're like, oh, wow, are you a psychic? I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. I don't know what the heck's going on. So you can call it whatever you want. But yeah, the inspiration is just based on the exchange, which is really cool. And I think that that's something really specific about this, because when I'm writing poems by myself in my room, for my books and whatnot, I'm not having a direct exchange with another individual. So those poems are like a conversation almost. And I'm definitely a part of the conversation, because the conversation is a two-way street. But I love just giving those poems away so freely, because they're not really mine, they're ours. And that's why it feels so cool to just be like, well, I don't ever have to see that again, because it's not something that I wrote for myself. It's something that I wrote specifically within the realm of this weird energy that I've exchanged with this person, and perhaps maybe like the hundreds of other people who are all around me in the moment of my writing it. But I hope that answers your question a little. It's definitely kind of a mysterious thing. I even had somebody do this weird like brain mapping thing with me once, where they were trying to figure out like what happens in your brain while you're writing on the spot. And there's like a blank spot on the test that was just like, we don't know what's happening right there. That's unmappable. But I found video. I have a video of it. The guy's like,
I gotta check it out.
yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to like just be like, yeah, there's some part of it that's kind of I'm not able to explain that. So
Do you look at other poets for inspiration? Like,
oh my goodness, yeah, I have lots
like so
and lots and lots.
are they like modern contemporary poets, or like from from the past? Like
Both, yeah, both.
Oh, both. Can you give me a name, like any names that you may?
In my new book, I have a huge
okay.
I have a huge reference list of all of these writers that I read kind of for like specific occasions too, which is interesting. Like if I'm looking for a certain type of inspiration, I tend to like lean towards this poet or this poet or this poet. But I'm a person who loves the naturalists. So I love like Wendell Berry and Mary Oliver and all these poets who write about the earth and being earth worshipers. But there's also a lot of like contemporary social justice. Like you can get into a lot of and also I don't know what is contemporary and what's not. Like something that seems sort of new to me might not be considered contemporary anymore. Like is Audre Lorde contemporary? I don't know, like maybe not. But yeah, okay. Does anyone have any other questions? You're welcome. Thank you. It was really nice to hang out with you. I hope I was interesting.
Doesn't contemporary mean just still alive?
Maybe. Yeah, does it? That's what I'm saying. I don't know. Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jacqueline, and thanks everyone for your questions. Tashan, thanks for bringing us back to like the origins of the practice to close out. That was really special to get to hear you, and all the best. What's your next thing? You're doing communal lunch stuff?
Oh yeah, I'm going to the community hall. We do there's like meals that are cooked there for the houseless population up here, and we're like painting and sanding the place today, so it can be nice.
Well, thanks for hanging with us, and I hope you have a good afternoon working with your hands. For those who are wanting to stay around, I'm gonna open up 4 breakout rooms right now. I'm hopeful, Chris, I know that you were taking some notes. If you don't mind sharing those, I'll send them out to everybody who is here. Again, the link to Jacqueline's book is in the chat if you're interested in it. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yes, I did say houseless. I see you asking that. Okay. Have a good one.
Take care. All right. So we've got these 4 breakout rooms. I'm opening them up right now. You should be able to join them as you like. There's one for publishing, editing, writing. There's one for activism, projects, and public practice. There's one for life balance, which I added hearing Jacqueline talk about that. And I'm like, oh, I need that one. And then there's the money room for you, Amy, and for everybody else. If you are interested in having that conversation, you should be able to jump around between them. Feel free to direct message me if you're not, and I'll help you figure it out. What else do I have to say? I'll close all of the rooms about 5 minutes before we end so that we can all come back together, and I expect some people will dip out, some people will stay and hang and chat. I know we've been on here for a second. So yeah, connect with each other. And I hear loud and clear the urge to have the next session be centered around collaboration. And I love that idea of thinking about this art form in connection with other art forms. So rad, let's do that. So hooray for that. Cool. Are folks seeing the breakout rooms?
No, where are they?
Okay. Usually it just pops up.
I can explain where they are. So if you go down, like if you make your Zoom full screen, if you look down at the center, there's going to be like the green share screen button and like that whole list of like participants, chat, record, and then there's going to be a box with 4 squares that says breakout rooms. If you press on that, it has a list of all of them, and then you could just click on which one you want to enter.
I don't see that box. I see all the other ones, but
you see. I wonder.
Yeah, I don't have it either.
Next to the
I don't have it either.
It might also be under more if like you have like an options button or a little hamburger menu on the side, and then it might say big breakout rooms under there.
Cat's in the money room. Does anyone, and Lila's in the activism public practice room. If you want to just shout out what room you want to be in, I can assign you to that room.
What were the rooms again? Sorry, I forgot everything.
No, of course. So we've got publishing, editing, and writing is one room.
Yeah.
Activism, projects, and public practice is another. Life balance is the third, and the money room is the fourth. Each has one person.
Can I have activism?
Activism, yes, you absolutely, Melody. I am so excited to join you for that. All right, you have the invite.
Publishing,
Abby, all right.
Me too, publishing.
And Sabine, publishing.
Publishing as well.
No.
Was that Marshall?
I'll take activism.
Cool. And Shane, were you publishing? No.
Yes, please.
Cool. Anybody else?
Activism, please, Brian.
Yes, sir. Where in Scotland are you, Luke?
I'm in Glasgow.
Well, I clicked it, but I don't know how to get in. So
You want to go? Where do you want to go, Amy?
Publishing and editing, please.
All right. And Emily?
Can I go to the public practices one, please?
Kev?
Thanks.
Rock me into publishing and whatnots.
Sounds
There it is.
good.
Thank you, my friend. Thanks for putting this on.
So fun. Love.